Hello, and I want to thank you for joining my session today, which is going to be Toolbox for working with gifted students. So as we know as teachers, when you're working with any student, that you have to sometimes you have to get down and just do the work. And you have to kind of roll up your sleeves and then take on any job that comes your way or any task that comes your way, and we always are having to adapt. The question becomes, do we have enough tools in our toolbox in order to successfully solve a problem or to manage something that needs to be managed? So, for example, if you were building in real life and you had to hammer a nail, you would want to have a hammer in your toolbox, obviously. If you only had a screwdriver, that's going to make things very difficult to get that work done and to be successful with that. So, what I brought here today is my toolbox. You can tell it's mine because it has my name on it. So we're going to be talking about what tools you might put in your toolbox to work with gifted students. So I do want to point out that a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today has resources and videos and all that on my website, which is www.thegiftedguide.com. And so if you want to check that out, please feel free to do that. And like I said, all that stuff is just there as a resource should you need. So what I'm going to be talking about are 5 strategies today. Each strategy impacts your day-to-day classroom in different ways, some more prevalent than others. So I've rated these. So what you see here is the scale. So a 1 means that it doesn't require much change to your day-to-day practices. It may be something that you have that students just go to when they have extra time, but you're not the one directing them to do so. It's not part of the class curriculum. It's just something that is there as a supplement. It's not more work, but it is work that they would have to engage in by choice. Second is you might have slight adjustments that you have to make, whether it's allotting some 30 minutes here during the week or whatever, but it's not your entire class. So it is just allotting a certain amount of time in your class to work on, and so your class is going to be affected a little bit, but not very much. A 3 means that it's used enough in your classroom that students take notice of this. So it's something that is used consistently, not constantly, but it's used consistently enough that students recognize that, oh, this is what we're doing, this is what we're entering into, this is what opportunities we have, what options we have. A 4 means that it's used quite a bit. There are some other forms of pedagogy that might be mixed in, or it might be blended together, but it is definitely there most of the time, and students are seeing this on a daily basis. And then the final one was just 5. This is a strategy that totally changes the way that you teach. It changes the pedagogy of what you do in your classroom. And so it has a huge impact on your day-to-day because things are going to look very differently as a result. So I'm going to give you strategies, examples for each one of these kind of levels of impact that it might have on your day-to-day teaching. The first thing I'm going to pull from my toolbox is what I call bulletin board enrichment. And bulletin board enrichment is simply having options for students on your classroom bulletin boards, whether they're attached to the wall or they're portable or whatever, but you have these options so when a student finishes early, they can go over and they can work on something that's going to challenge them. So for example, some of the things I have in my toolbox are riddles. So students love to solve riddles. It engages their brain, they're fun, it doesn't seem like work. It's just something that is kind of exercising the brain. So a question like, in a calendar, some months have 30 days and some months have 31 days. How many months have 28 days? And so a student would of course come up with the answer of 12, hopefully, because all of them have 28 days. It doesn't say that it ends with 28 days. So this would help that abstract and concrete gifted thinker to think a little bit outside the box. So I use riddles with my students. I like Sudoku because it teaches mathematical thinking. And so I can just put a stack of Sudoku in the back of the room at one of my bulletin boards. I can have easy, medium, and hard versions of this. I can have 4 grids, I can have 9 grids, I can have, so you can make it as challenging as you want to make it, but make it accessible for people as well. So Sudoku is something that I like to do. I like doing what are called rebus puzzles. The rebus puzzles are these puzzles where you have it's kind of a visual clue. And then you kind of have to figure out what it is. So for instance, you have this head and this heels. And so when you look at this, you have to think, well, what is it saying that kind of represents what's going on? So you have head over heels. Or when you have this one right here, where you have all these twos and then day. It's Tuesday. Some of them are a little more tricky, like this is one of my favorite ones right here, where you have all these issues. And students will put up guesses like, well, many issues, or lots of issues, or whatever. But if you count, there are 10 of them. It's tennis shoes. So it's kind of, it's forcing them to think a little bit differently and a little bit outside the box, and it's going to challenge their thinking. I also like to use what are called logic puzzles. Logic puzzles use deductive reasoning. So you have this grid here, you have these clues, and you can eliminate some people. You can determine that some people are the choice, and you use logic and deductive reasoning in order to figure out the answers to these. And so I like to place any of these types of things at the back of the room, near a bulletin board, and that way students know that when they are done with their work early, they can choose to go over and work on something. And it doesn't have to be done. It's not turn in, it's not for a grade. It's not, they may come check answers with me, which is perfectly fine, but it's not something I'm going to be grading. It's not something I'm requiring of them. It's not something that they are, that's part of the curriculum necessary. It is just exercising their brain, getting those neurons firing, getting them thinking. So that would be a 1, because it doesn't really take much of your day-to-day. You just have those in the back, and they're just available for students to choose whether they're going to enter into those or not. My 2 example for my toolbox is what is called 20 time. So what exactly is 20 time? 20 time is based on the theory that Google had, which is that their employees were given 20% of their workday to work on whatever they wanted to, anything that they wanted to, as long as it was something to do with what the company's mission was. And so what happened is employees would then work during this time on things that were really exciting to them and very intriguing to them. And so a lot of things that we know nowadays, like Google Maps and Gmail, all those things were developed during this time. I have Post-it notes for a very good reason, for a couple reasons. First off, Post-it notes were developed at 3M. 3M also had a kind of a 20 time like setup where people could work on things on their own. And during this time, a worker at 3M invented the Post-it note. And so there, we have those today because of that time that was given to them. So what this looks like in your classroom is that you give students a little additional time, maybe a half hour during the week, or 10 minutes here during every day, or at the end of the week you give them or the end of a couple weeks you give them an entire hour. But they're basically working on problem-based learning. They're trying to solve what is called a wicked problem. A wicked problem is not something that can be solved very easily. It cannot be, you can't just slap tape on it or glue and it's solved. So these are big issues. So we're talking about issues like poverty, we're talking about war, bullying. All those would be wicked problems that don't have really concrete solutions, but have a lot of strategies that can be used. And so what you do is you kind of ask students to come up with, you brainstorm their own wicked problem. And then they try to come up with a way to solve said problem. And they do so through 20 times. So this time you give to them. Now, it is important, like any time you're building or you're trying to build something, it's important to have a structure. And so even though this seems like a free-for-all where students can just go work on whatever they want, you do want to provide a structure for them. So that's what's also on my Post-it notes. So what we have here, step number 1, is the idea. So what is this wicked problem that students are trying to solve? Step number 2 of the process is then research this idea. Learn everything you can about this. This might include reaching out to mentors, who will be able to give you information and insight that maybe you can't find in a book or online or whatever. So this is connecting with mentors that are going to help you. So if you're looking at poverty and you reach out to someone who runs a soup kitchen in your town and you talk about what the issues are and things, so that would be an example of how you could develop a mentor. The third step is the proposal. So what is it that you're going to do? So you have this problem, you have this wicked problem, and the question becomes, what are you actually going to tangibly do to help with this problem? So what is your proposal? What is your solution? And keep in mind, there is no right or wrong with these solutions. There's just these proposals that may have some success or more success than others. And so students then have to enter into that. The fourth step is a blog. Because even though kids are working independently, and you're probably checking in with them as the class goes along, you want to know what's going through their head. You want to know what the process is. So every day during 20 time, students write a blog, which is answering questions like, how are things going? Are they going like you expected? What do you hope to get out of this? What are things that you could be doing? What are things you could be doing better? So it's just a way for students to kind of funnel their thoughts into a document, and it allows you to see what's going on in their head at the time. So step 4 is the blog. Step 5 is known as the elevator pitch. If you had to sell this to somebody and you only had 5 minutes on the ride from the elevator from the top of a building to the bottom of a building, must be a very large building, how could you pitch it to them in a brief amount of time? And so students develop this pitch, and it does a couple things. It teaches them oral communication, it teaches them public speaking, it teaches them to build confidence because they have to be able to give there and to communicate a lot of information in a short amount of time. So there's a lot of skills going on here with their elevator pitch. I'm really big into authentic assessments or authentic products, and so in this case that is our step number 6, which students will come up with a TED Talk. And it's kind of going to be a combination of all these things, but it's kind of the culmination of the 20 time project. So at the end of the time that is allotted for 20 time, students would get up and give TED Talks. They would have visuals. They would talk about their wicked problem, what they did, the proposal they came up with, how would they pitch it, and so on and so forth. So this is a structure that can be used for 20 time. And again, this is a 2 because you are allotting a little bit of time, class time, either every day or every week or every month, but it's not overtaking your class. It is just kind of a kind of little slice of your class that you are providing. So that's why that is a 2. So the third one that I'm going to talk about is performance assessment. So what this looks like in a classroom is students are tasked with learning something. And typically in their traditional classroom, we give them a written assessment, whether it's an essay or multiple choice, whatever. And so that's how we determine a lot of times mastery. But there are so many other ways that students could show you mastery, in so many different ways that they could, use their skills that they already possess or develop skills that they've always wanted to possess. So what I'm going to pull out here is actually a virtual tool, which I'm going to throw up there on the screen. And so what you see here this is a choice board for students to use different types of educational technology. So could they use Google Forms to create something, a response? Could they shoot a video on WeVideo that gives their answer of what they're going to do? So are there ways that students can express to you what they have learned other than the traditional way? It could be that they are going to perform a scene from a play that they wrote that demonstrates what they learned from this particular book or whatever. Or it might be an exhibition where they are, they've created a poster of Mesopotamia, or they could create a slideshow on, using Google Slides that they would use to people to go through. But what performance assessments do is they allow students to use the skills that they possess. So if you have a student who's really good at speaking but doesn't like to write, having an option like this is going to allow you to really find out what they learn, because what was holding them back before was the writing aspect, because those gifted kids that always want to just give one sentence or the bare minimum. But if you ask them to explain something, they'll spend 10 minutes explaining it. And so it was really important that they have an outlet for that. So I like to use menu boards or choice boards with my students and say, okay, here's what you need to learn. You can choose any of these products to show me what you learned. And then students, and sometimes I may give them 3 choices, sometimes I may give them 20 choices, sometimes I may tell them to come up with their own. But the idea of a performance assessment is that students can show what they have learned, and they're not limited to your own idea. So for example, if you give a multiple choice test, the answer is either right or wrong. There's a ceiling to that. But when you have performance assessments, you can lift the ceiling off of that, which is really good for gifted students especially, because they have a lot that they may be able to share that they couldn't show on a multiple choice test, but they can show in other ways of what they've mastered and what they've learned. So it's really important to have these performance assessments as options for students. This is an impact of a 3 on your day-to-day because what happens when you're working with performance assessments is you may have kids choosing different things. So I had a science classroom with 25 kids in it, and they may choose 25 different products. And so it's going to look very different when it comes to how do we assess that? Do I set aside time if they have an exhibition to show that, or how do I evaluate that? And so it is going to have a decent impact on your class, but it's not going to affect everything. So you still may teach the way that you teach and just offer assessments, alternative or performance assessments for students to do. So that would be a 3. The next one I'm going to talk about is higher level questioning. And so what I'm going to pull out of my toolbox is a flip chart for Bloom's taxonomy. So Bloom's taxonomy, as you can see here, is just a different levels of thinking that we're requiring of students. So you start with the basics of remembering, understanding, and applying, and eventually you get to the higher levels of thinking, such as analyzing, or evaluating, or creating. And so these flip charts are really good because when you go into them, they give you some verbs that you can use in your questioning to help you with that. It also gives you some starters, what are called stems. For instance, it will say, can you recall? Can you list the 3? Which one? This is under the remembering, which is the basic. And so what we want to do is we want to use this Bloom's taxonomy, or any you could use, there are other ones out there that you can use as well. But in this case, I like Bloom's because it gives you so many choices with students. It gives you 6 different levels of thinking. And in a lot of these systems, only the top are the higher level thinking. Half of this is higher level thinking. And so when you're writing your assessments, you want to consider higher level thinking questions. Now keep in mind, I'm not suggesting that you omit or get rid of your lower level questions. You need those as building blocks. But the question you have to ask yourself is, what is the ratio of higher level to lower level questions that you're asking in your classroom? Because it should be around the 50% mark. And it should be a sliding scale. So for example, when you're starting out and you're introducing something new, you're going to ask a lot of these lower level questions because students are just getting a basic understanding. But once they gain this basic understanding, you should be asking more higher level questions, including on your assessments, because you want students to be able to engage in that thinking. Because higher level thinking is one of the most powerful things you can do in your classroom to differentiate. So I'm asking this student this question, verbally, and then I'm going to ask the same question, same idea, but in a different way to this student over here, because this student has shown they're able to handle the challenge, and this student just needs to show me they know the basics. And so we can differentiate with these higher level questioning skills. So the final tool I'm going to talk about today is project-based learning. This is something very near and dear to my heart. So when I pull out my tools from the toolbox in this case, what you see is a structure. Project-based learning is using projects for learning. So it's different than just projects. Projects typically come at the end of a unit, and it's kind of a summary of what they learned or a display of what they learned. Project-based learning that's where the learning takes place. While they're working on the project, they are learning. They are learning what it is that they're supposed to have mastered. So that's the distinctive difference between projects and project-based learning. So if you're going to use project-based learning, you have to make sure that you follow steps yourself. So what you see here are steps that you, when you're creating your projects, need to consider. First is defining the problem. This could be based on a standard, it can be based on an essential question, it can be based on something that students came up with. But what is the problem that is trying to be solved with this particular project? Then you're going to develop solution options. This just means, how are students going to demonstrate to you that they learn what they were supposed to have learned? So they can use performance assessments, like we talked about before. They can use pencil to paper tests if they want. They can use all sorts of things. But sometimes you set this solution option, sometimes you give students choices. I love to give students choice boards to allow them to pick something that's going to be interesting to them and where they can show off a skill that they possess. Then you're going to actually plan the project. So once you know what they're supposed to be learning and what it is that they're supposed to be producing, then you plan the project. And I usually like to work backwards from there. I start with my product that they do at the end, and then I work backwards. What are all the skills they're going to need? Are they going to need to do research? Are they going to have to learn how to give a presentation? Are they going to have to learn how to do a Google Slides or whatever it is that their product leads them to? And they're going to have to be learning in the case up here at the very beginning. So it kind of works backwards. And so I have a whole project that is planned. 4 is executing the plan. So this is just communicating very clearly. Hattie's visible learning. What are students supposed to be learning with this project? Sometimes I can get away from you, especially if you have really creative projects. Kids get so excited about the creativity of it, they lose sight of what it is they're supposed to be learning. So you have to make sure that you clearly communicate that, whether it be on a syllabus or whether it be on your posting standards or your learning objectives on the board, whatever. But students need to be very familiar with this. 5 is monitoring and controlling progress. This is why project-based learning is a 5 on the scale, because it will change the way that you teach. Because you no longer will be the teacher. You will be the facilitator. You're kind of the project manager that is helping students along, but they are doing the teaching and learning themselves, which is creating independent, self-reliant students. And especially, project-based learning works with all kids, but I especially love it with gifted students because it usually has no ceiling. Kids can take it as far as they want to, so it organically differentiates for kids, because kids could enter in here or enter in here and enter in here and take it as far as they're able to take the project. And so they're not being stopped by a ceiling or stopped by the constraints. They can take it as far as they want to. So monitoring and controlling progress means that you are having conversations with students, sometimes something that we don't get to do all the time with our students. So how can we have those conversations? How can you check in with them? There are different types of conferences that you can have with students to check in and see how they're doing. So the role of the teacher becomes very different because you're not in front of the classroom. The last year I was in the classroom, I put my desk in the center of the classroom, not at the front. And then I sat at that desk and listened to all the conversations going on. I would get up and go have conversations when I heard something interesting. And so this is about facilitating or managing the students rather than giving them the information. They're going to find this information themselves. And you can do this with kids. You see, I did this with kids in 2nd grade. And so you don't have to say, well, they don't know how to do this. You teach them those skills of how to find that information, and then they can find that themselves. And so the tool that I pull from my toolbox, there are 4 tools that I use with students. The first is a project contract. This is something that students then enter into, and they decide what it is that they're going to be learning, what are their learning objectives, how are they going to accomplish it, what is their product. And so this just puts us both on the same page. Here's my expectations, and these are their expectations. And they're having a say-so in how they're doing the learning. So, especially in group work, I have them do project contracts, and then I sign it, they sign it, parents sign it, so everyone is on the same page. This is part of that executing the plan, making sure that everything is clear. And I do this before we even start the project. What you see here is a calendar. And it is blank because the students are the ones that fill it in. So I may say you have 3 weeks. So they need to make sure that their ending date is 3 weeks in. So they have 15 days to work with. How are they going to manage their time? Because this is going to teach really valuable executive function skills. How to prioritize, how to manage your time, how to make sure that you are, when you get behind, how to get caught back up. So it's really important to learn those things. So a calendar, I can sit down when I conference and say, pull out your calendar. Where are you? Why aren't you where you need to be? Or it's good to see that you're where you need to be or a little bit ahead of that. How can you alter that? But I always tell students the calendar is not written in stone other than the due date. so they can determine for themselves what that's kind of going to look like. The next thing is a blank rubric, because how do you evaluate these? And so if students are doing different products, you're going to, especially if they're not paper to pencil where there's a very clear right or wrong, this is a little more subjective. But if you make a clear rubric, then you're getting that subjectivity out of that and you're making it more objective. So what does it look like if they did an excellent job on one aspect of it? What would it look like if they just did a good job or if they needed improvement? And so sometimes I'll give this to students as a rubric. Sometimes the students and I will create it together. The best case scenario is there are times where all my students are working on something different, so they're all creating different rubrics that are specific to their project. And so I'm evaluating them using different rubrics for each student. And so what you see here is we can use these strategies depending upon the problem that we're facing. So we want to have the tool that's going to solve that problem. So for our first one, which was the bulletin board, if a student finishes early, this is a tool that can solve that problem. What can they do now that they have this extra time? For the 20 time, it's what happens when kids start to lose their love of learning. I mean, gifted kids are innately curious, are innately interested, innately love to learn. But sometimes schools kind of beat this out of them or have so much structure that they no longer love to learn. So how can we reinstate that? 20 times an excellent way to do that because students are getting a lot of choice and they're getting to do something they're very passionate about. Third, the performance assessments. So the problem here is how do you tap into your students' skills and abilities? Well, you give them lots of choices so that if the kid is really good at making movies, they make a video that shows off what if you have a kid who's a really excellent writer, they do a research paper. So you're giving them options to show off their skills and abilities or to develop them. So if you have a student that's not really strong as a public speaker, they may choose to do a public speaking product because it's going to help them to develop that and learn those skills. The fourth one, which is the higher level questioning. This is the problem of how do we challenge the thinking of gifted students who need to be challenged. And so this is an obvious way to do that by constructing questions that are going to cause them to think, to cause them to sweat a little bit. It's not going to be the easy answer, the real quick answer that some gifted kids come up with. It's something they're going to have to think about. And that's what we want to do with them. The fifth, which is the level 5, which is the project-based learning. So this is teaching them, what if you have students that aren't really good at independent learning? So this really teaches independent learning. So how do you learn for yourself? It's the old Confucian saying is if you give someone a fish, they eat for a single day. But if you teach them how to fish, they can eat for the rest of their lives. So project-based learning is about teaching them how to learn so that they can become independent workers. And so these are just some of the tools in my toolbox. I have several that I use depending upon what the situation that arises. So what you see here are several more examples of strategies that you can use in your classroom. And I'm not able to go into detail on all of these, but if you want to check these out, there's a couple places where you can learn more about each of these strategies. So one of these places would be this book right here, which is a teacher's toolbox for gifted education. So in there it talks about each of these strategies, how you might use it, what are some ways that you can differentiate here or there, and why it works with gifted students. So that's one option for finding out more about these different strategies. The second option are these, which I call Todd Talks. And so these are little video tutorials that I make that help to understand these strategies. So the 20 strategies, the 5 I talked about, and the 15 I just showed you are all talked about on this Todd Talk, on these Todd Talks. So I have them separately. You can see them; they're separately divided up here, and then you can say, okay, I want to learn about Makerspace, and you can watch a 20-minute video on that, and I'll give you some ideas for Makerspace. Or you say, I really want to learn how to do, with my students, I want to learn how to do more depth and complexity. So there's one on there that will help with that. Or there may be some terms that you saw, like 4 corners, and you don't know what that means. Well, I'll explain what 4 corners is and how you can use that with students and why that's good for working with gifted students. So I really want to thank you for attending my session today. Again, the website is there that's where the Todd Talks are. That's where a lot of so I have like blank, or not blank, but I have a lot of the materials here that I talked about, such as I have some Sudoku on there, I have some riddles on there, I have templates for project-based learning, I have examples of menu boards, I have all the things that we talked about today. There are resources on that under the tab Resources. And so here's my contact information. So again, there's the website. I am on Twitter at _gifted_guy. And on this Twitter feed, I'm always giving, sharing blogs that I've written, or videos that I've made, or things that I've seen in the classroom with my students. And so it's a good place to get some professional development on a daily basis, just a real quick here or there. And then lastly, there is my email address, thegiftedguy@yahoo.com.